It's an American idea. Today's child will be tomorrow's citizen. Education shapes our expression of liberty, and separate, well, that has never been equal. We are the students of a new day. Brave scholars who claim desk and classroom, book and school until the self-evident truths expressed through our victories gave this nation's first declaration renewed life. Each mind is beautiful. Strength has many forms, and we are all able.
Hello, welcome to the Smithsonian Folklife Festival Story Circle, Beyond ADA 30, Impacts, Intersections, and Reflecting Forward. Thank you so much for joining us. Real-time captioning and American Sign Language interpretation are available during today's live program. To view the simulcast that includes these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing this program after the live broadcast, please note that it will be made available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Diane Nutting. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. If you don't already know about the festival, I encourage you to check out festival.si.edu to learn more about our programs, education, resources, and more. We just heard the poem An American Idea, written and performed by Lederick Horne, who you will meet in just a few moments. His words really help set the stage for our conversation today. This past Sunday, July 26, 2020, the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, marking 30 years passed for us. A landmark legislation prohibiting the discrimination of people with disabilities in all aspects of public life. And of course, this year's anniversary comes at a time when we are also navigating the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and systemic racism. There are deep impacts within and across the disability community, and much to consider as we dream forward to a post-pandemic world. So today we've invited 3 leaders within the disability community to share their perspectives as administrators, educators, activists, and artists. We're taking your comments and questions in the chat below, so please participate and join in the conversation with us. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome today's guests. First up, Lederick Horne, who is a poet and spoken word artist whose work you just saw and some work that you will hear at the end of this program as well. Lederick is also an advocate, public speaker, and educational consultant. He's a founding board member for Eye to Eye, a resource organization for youth with learning disabilities. And he is the co-author of Empowering Students with Hidden Disabilities, A Path to Pride and Success. Welcome, Lederick. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Anil Lewis. Anil is the Executive Director of Blindness Initiatives at the National Federation of the Blind. As Anil describes it, a Birth to Earth research and training initiative developed by and for the blind and low vision community, offering resources in the areas of accessibility, education, employment, and civil rights. Hi, Anil, we're so glad you're here.
My pleasure. Looking forward to the dialogue.
And last but certainly not least, our colleague and neighbor from across the mall, when we are all on the mall, Beth Zebarth, who is the Director of Access Smithsonian, which develops and implements accessibility policy and guidelines for all of the institution's 19 museums, the National Zoo, and 9 research centers. She and her team ensure that visitors experience a welcoming environment that accommodates individuals of all ages and abilities through consistent and integrated inclusive design. I love that. Welcome, Beth. We're so glad to have you. And welcome to all of you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So to start out, we have many viewers with us today, some who may be extremely familiar with the ADA and some who may have heard of it but may not have a large base of knowledge around what the ADA is. So Beth, I'd actually like to ask if you wouldn't mind giving us just a brief overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act, what it covers, who is covered under it, just so we can have sort of a framework for our conversation today.
Sure, and be happy to. Before I start, I'm going to give a brief description of myself, so that will give our audience a little clue as to why I'm wearing a mask today. So I am a 60-year-old white female who has short blonde hair, glasses, and my background is my living room. I am wearing a mask because I had oral surgery the other day, and the bruising is extensive, and you don't want to see that. So that's, it's not a political statement, although it could be. Take it the way you want to, I guess. But on to an explanation about the ADA. The landmark 1964 Civil Rights Act didn't extend discrimination protection to people with disabilities. In subsequent years, Congress passed a number of laws to ensure people with disabilities could access federal buildings and participate in federal programs, obtain federal jobs, and receive an education. In 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act to eliminate discrimination by state and local governments and the private sector. Now, the 25% and growing part of the population with disabilities is benefiting from extensive discrimination protection.
That's great. Thank you so much, Beth. And 25%, I think a lot of people are sometimes really shocked to hear that number and shocked to hear that that number is so high. So I'd like to ask all of you, and we're actually going to start with Anil, but I'd like to ask all of you we've just passed 30 years, and I've read and heard a lot over the past month and the past few weeks, a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of celebration, but also a lot of reflection. And I just would like to ask each of you to briefly reflect on what does this anniversary of 30 years mean to each of you, either professionally in your own work or personally. Anil, can we start with you?
Sure. And I feel compelled to, based on your introduction of the panel and what Beth just said, to state that I was born in 1964. I'm an African-American male, and I went blind in 1989. And those are kind of crucial points, touch points in life, because as an African-American male, I really benefited from the work that many advocates did to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to make it possible for me to believe in myself and actually own the arrogance, I would call it, to feel that I belong in society as an equal. And when I became blind in 1989, subsequently in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And again, due to the work of some really powerful advocates who were really working for equal rights without the framework of the law, passed the ADA. And I, in turn, was able to benefit from that work to, again, step into that space of arrogance to believe that I belong even as a blind person. And I think that realistically, over the 30 years, the thing that's been powerful for me is, as I've had to redefine myself as a blind person with the onset of the disability, the Americans with Disabilities Act, despite the laws that have been passed, the law itself being passed to create ways for me to advocate, really the spirit of the ADA, which infused in me very early on in my life existence as a person with a disability, that I had the right to be an equal, and I had the right to participate in society alongside my peers. So I'm very pleased with the 30 years. Of course, there's a lot to do. Moving forward with everything, there's a lot to do.
Thank you. Derek, can we get to you? What are your reflections as you think on 30 years?
Well, very much like Anil, I benefited both from the civil rights movement as well as the disability rights movement. And I was born in '77, and so, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, at least its first iteration, came into being a few years before I was born. And I'm a person with dyslexia, learning and attention issues. And special education was created right around the time I really started going to school. And I graduated from high school, thankfully, in 1996. And so the ADA was already there, protecting me as an adult, taking these first few steps into the adult world, into college. And I can remember being in a disability support program as a college student in a local county college. And it was maybe the first time I really learned about the ADA, because they were teaching me how to advocate for myself within the classroom. And so in thinking back over the 30-year history of these laws and the protections that it provides, I feel tremendously grateful, but I also know, and not a but, and I also am very much aware that without us continuing to guard over these civil rights, they're still very much in danger. And although the major push of the disability rights movement may not be happening now, it still requires all of us to be ever vigilant.
Yeah, and Beth, I'm actually seeing you nod your head in agreement here. What are your reflections as you think about this anniversary?
Yeah, I think about how I was 16 when I acquired a spinal cord injury from a car accident, and I spent probably the first 15 years of my life when I had a disability really trying to pass. I wanted to be, just like everybody else. I didn't want to be called out as a person with a disability. Kind of hard because it's pretty obvious when you're a wheelchair user, but, you try. And then I really finally realized when living in Washington, D.C., and being surrounded by a much more aware kind of environment about disability and access, that I really wanted to claim disability as my identity. I mean, it was an important characteristic of my, my makeup, and so it actually a lot of 30s here. So it was in my 30s, I started claiming disability as an identity. I've spent 30 years at the Smithsonian working on accessibility professionally, and it's the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So just kind of a nice coincidence. It's a good time to reflect on it.
Oh, that's great. And I will get to some of the work that you do at the Smithsonian, Beth, and later in the conversation, and how that sort of interweaves with that 30-30 as it is. I'm curious for all of you, and actually, Anil, I'd love to have you, or I'm sorry, Laderick, I'd love to have you answer this one first. Do you feel that the way in which just the general public defines disability has shifted in the past 30 years? Do you feel like there's been a shift of where those boundaries are, or where that definition is, or what those parameters are? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it has shifted. I was just, I'm stuck at home like everybody else, and in between work watching YouTube, and I saw the show Hannibal, and so it's like one of the main characters is a person who's on the spectrum, and I can point to all these different places in the media where people with disabilities are sort of being pushed more and more to the forefront, and so I think we get a sense of the broadness of the disability community, but at the same time, I firmly believe that the vast majority of people, when we talk about disability, think about folks who use wheelchairs or use canes, and they don't necessarily think of me as being a person, right? Or folks like me as being people who have disabilities. And this is a real challenge, because I think it feeds into a lot of the stigma, right? That a lot of folks, like in my population, the folks with the quote unquote hidden disabilities, fight with, which oftentimes prevents us from accessing the supports that we need in order to live out to our fullest potential. So I think part of this is like, it's the cyclical fight of culture influencing policy and then being informed by culture, that we continuously have to be putting forth images to say that there is this broadness of our community. And like Beth was saying, I think one of the key moments in my life was a point where I started accepting disability as being a part of who I was. And I don't know if the larger American society has really totally accepted people with disabilities as being a part of this overall community.
Anil, did you want to chime in there?
Sure. Building on what was said by both Laderick and Beth, I think it's like a parallel track, right? When you're talking about the ADA. Luckily for me, I found the National Federation of the Blind, which is an organization of blind people, believing in the capacity of blind people. So it was very easy for me to establish an identity, a positive self-concept of myself as a blind person. But I think what ADA, again, did is it provided that framework of protection that gave me, again, the arrogance to really be out there fully participating in the world. And I think that it helps other people with disabilities have that same identity. And I think the legal framework that's offered by the Americans with Disabilities Act also creates an opportunity for us to educate society, specifically in the employment space. When it was originally passed, the ADA was referred to in many circles as the Employment Attorneys Retirement Act, because everybody was suing about employment discrimination, et cetera. But sometimes that's what you need to get people's attention, right? And I think that now, due to a variety of different organizations, many of the corporate entities are recognizing that disability should be included in the discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we have to do that in a way that's respectful, because, again, historically, people with disabilities were included in that with more of a moral sense of obligation or responsibility. It was the right thing to do. But now we're really recognizing that people with disabilities do have capacity, and we're making the business case to those employers to make sure that they recognize that this inclusion of people with disabilities in their workspace really gets them an opportunity to leverage on the fact that every day we have to problem solve, living in a world that's not made for us. And we bring that particular ability to problem solve to a team that's, helping develop that next generation product or innovating that next generation technology. And you're getting information that otherwise would not be available. So I think that the ADA, although it came in, under a different perspective, people are really starting to digest it as recognizing it is the right thing to do. It's becoming more common sense. And again, as LaDerek was saying earlier, it's up to us as people with disabilities to make sure that we continue to enforce it, lest we go back to the days of pity, and we don't have time for pity.
Right. And I want to just, I want to remind everyone that we're taking questions and comments in the chat. So please feel free to drop those in, and we'll try to take as many as we can and have you engage in the conversation. I want to just bounce back to LaDerek really quickly, and both Anil and LaDerek, you're talking about this idea of, taking agency and problem solving, but also claiming the identity. We do have a question from Lisa. And she identifies she's a mom with 2 dyslexic sons and a husband who has dyslexia. And she talks about, how do you recommend people feel comfortable identifying with a disability, essentially owning it without feeling uncomfortable? And I think you started to touch on that, LaDerek, a little bit about how sort of the later generation, generations now feel, might feel more comfortable sort of claiming that. But any comments or sort of response to that?
So the first one is just in the book that I co-authored with Dr. Margot Izzo, Empowering Students with Hidden Disabilities, a Path to Pride and Success. We actually created a framework for disability identity development. And one of the stages within that, and it's one that we're really pushing forward to the field that we think is one of the essential parts of preparing young people for the adult world, is connecting to the disability community. I think that even for me, and I spent a lot of time in special ed from 3rd grade until I graduated from high school, which meant I spent a lot of time around people with disabilities. It was still a very lonely experience. And so, all across the United States, in different states, we have the Youth Leadership Forum. There are organizations and entities that are creating events where young people with disabilities can get together. I'm on the board of Eye to Eye, and a part of what we do is mentoring for students with learning and attention issues. And I think there is tremendous value in us getting together and realizing that we're not alone. And I think it is, actually, I know it is one of the powerful aspects of disability culture, is that it is not always communicated from parent to child, but oftentimes from a person with a disability and a person with a disability. And if you don't have that person with a disability in your household, then you've got to connect with this bigger community. Mm-hmm. So being able to tap in on people who have, like Anil said, solved some of these problems, figured out where the sources of access and support are, and being able to pass that on from one generation to the next, I think is really crucial in being able to own the label and then also giving you the freedom to sort of redefine it in a way which feels true to you.
So actually, what I'd like to do is actually shift us. I can't believe we're almost halfway to the halfway point. How is that possible? But this is so great, and there's so much rich. And actually, Beth, I'm gonna go to you first for this next section. I'd like us to begin to shift a little bit to the present day. We are, of course, navigating dual pandemics, COVID, systemic racism, and if you can start, Beth, where do you see this impacting the disability community? There's obviously a lot of overlap, but I'm just curious if you can sort of talk a little bit about where you see these impacts happening across the community and even within your own work.
Yeah. So I'll start more with the personal. As a person with a disability, the pandemic of COVID-19 is something that you have to fear. You, as a person with a disability, may not be seen as having as much value as other people's lives. It's almost a eugenics kind of question. In thinking about whether you are going to provide people with disabilities with the life-saving measures that if they are hospitalized, access to ventilators, etc., or whether you're going to choose that somebody who does not have a disability should receive that over the person who has a disability. So that's one of those things that, it's a tangible fear in the disability community currently, to have access to what's necessary if you do get COVID-19 and are hospitalized. But it's also the big issue of health disparity and how COVID-19 is impacting disproportionately people of color, people with disabilities. And it was interesting, Judy Heumann talked about this yesterday, that 50 to 60,000 people who have died from COVID were in institutions. Now, when you think about institutions, it's broad, it's nursing homes, it's prisons, etc. But that's a really striking number. And it's another part to the disability community's fear of, being institutionalized and not being able to have more agency over your own life by choosing to live in the community, which could be safer in a pandemic instead of being institutionalized. So those are some of the kind of personal things that a person with a disability might be grappling with. In my work at the Smithsonian, I'm thinking about how our reopening strategies and then the new normal in museums, what that's going to look like and how that's going to impact people with disabilities. And so, we have to think about what we're going to do. One of the hot topics is tactile access in museums and whether we are going to have to close off everything that is tactile because that's a health and safety issue. And what I am really kind of begging people to think about is short-term strategies for health and safety in the pre-vaccine era, and long-term strategies that are post-vaccine, where we have not decided that there's no more touch in a museum. We really want to maintain, sustain the access that we have fought so hard for in the past 50 years in the museum environment, where we don't have just glass cases with objects in them, that we have experiences for people with disabilities.
Yeah, definitely. And Anil, can you talk a little bit about just the impacts within, I know we were talking a couple of days ago and you were talking about the impacts within your community and also the perception of the impacts within your community.
And that, I think, well, a lot of this is based on people's initial perception. of the capacity of people with disabilities, I have to admit my fear is that it's going to exacerbate some pre-existing perceptions that people with disabilities prefer to live lives of isolation. I've heard people come to me and say, well, this must be very easy for you sheltered in place because this is how people with disabilities are used to living, as though it's a choice. And that's very frustrating to me. It's not a choice. I mean, it is a testament to our resilience and ability to be able to weather through this, but it's not a choice. And I would hate for people to think that when we come out of this, that's what we want to return to. The other piece is, I think that based on the fact that we've had to go virtual, we've really kind of had an opportunity within the National Federation of the Blind to really promote why we felt accessibility to educational systems, digital education systems and employment systems were so important, because had they been more accessible, the transition for blind individuals to get a proper education would be equal to that of our sighted peers. And on the employment side, kind of the beautiful back end of that is many employers who thought that their jobs could not be done virtually are finding out that they can. And in doing that, they're having to rely on technology, which is accessible to blind individuals. So it is creating even more employment opportunities for blind individuals. So that's kind of a positive to this. And I dare to be optimistic about what's going on as we weather through this pandemic. I am optimistic that the tools that we are learning and refining and enhancing to deal with the virus, once we, as Beth was saying, post-COVID, hopefully we won't return back to what used to be, but we'll take what we've learned and enhance what previously existed to create more opportunities for people with disabilities. But the last thing that I really would like to emphasize is, in this virtual world, in a lot of instances, the disability becomes moot. Like if I make sure I'm oriented correctly and looking at the screen, people won't know that I'm blind. People won't know that Beth is in a wheelchair if she's framing the photo correctly. So it makes almost all the disabilities kind of hidden, which allows us to really be seen as equals in a way without that misconception of incapacity that many people have around people with disabilities before we enter the room. But the other side of that, there's goods and positives and negatives around all of this, is we cannot acquiesce and state that should be the new norm, because the real way that we change people's minds and perceptions around people with disabilities is we have to engage in those environments so they can see me and get to know me, and see Beth and get to know Beth, and see LaDerek and get to know LaDerek. And then we become normal, contributing, participating members in their society as well.
So that I'm hearing you, that idea of representation is such a vital part, and it's playing into this sort of world that we're in now, for sure.
And it's really interesting that we've done such a good job of trying to be more inclusive and integrating, and now COVID is forcing us to be more segregated and not connected, and we just can't lose the what we can gain through actually interacting in the physical space with one another.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're I think the disability community is intersecting with both of the pandemics that we're dealing with right now. So we have COVID, we have the pandemic of systemic racism. And
segregation plays a role in that too. Sorry to cut you off, but that that old thing about, I'm not racist because I know a Black friend. It's not about knowing a Black person. It's more what LaDerek was saying. It's about being part of a community and being immersed in that community. So it's more than just knowing them. I forget the movie, maybe Mississippi Burning or something like that, and the white attorney defended the Black guy, and he says, well, we're friends, the white attorney said to the Black guy. And he says, we've never been friends. You've never been to my house. You've never met my kids. So I think that's what we can't afford for the pandemic to create the segregation that's exacerbated the previous racial pandemic. We got to find a way, again, to really enter into each other's spaces, because that's the only way we'll really get to know one another and appreciate the value that we all have.
Yeah.
Go, LaDerek. Yeah, I see you responding.
And I can just say that from the moment you posed this question and Beth's response and Neil's, is like I feel myself going all over the place. So this response may feel a bit disjointed, but one of the first emotions that I had is that just a few months ago I buried my father, and first my cousin passed away, who lived right next to me, who died from COVID, and my father passed away in a nursing home. Not from COVID, but it was just sort of his time. And, the end of 2019, after employing a staff of 5 people at home, after modifying the house my father and my grandmother both lived in together, after doing all this and providing over 12 years of care, I decided that I couldn't do it anymore and that they needed to transition into a facility. And then I'm in New Jersey. I'm talking to you now from central New Jersey, and a huge percentage of the deaths from COVID happened within nursing facilities. And and so I'm sitting here now, very conscious of the way that disability surrounds all of us, but certainly me, in that I'm a person with a disability, but then I've also been caring for and supporting members of my family. And the big thing that just hits me now is just it should not be this difficult. Like in a nation as advanced as ours, in this era of technological support, we should be able to do better. Sure. And then I'm almost a bit like I recoil a bit in thinking about police brutality or racism as a pandemic, because I sort of think of pandemics as things that come and go. And this is something that particularly Black people here in the U.S., Black and brown people here in the U.S. have been dealing with, since before America was America. And so, that I think that there's always been this sort of interplay too. Like, I don't think we get 504 if it wasn't for the Black Panthers stepping in, and supporting those protesters with hot meals when they had to occupy that government building, and I also, during all of this, was doing what a lot of us was doing, where I was online and I'm sharing information and what have you. But after a while, I also said, what I believe this moment asks of us now is for us to really look at our organizations and our institutions and to honestly ask the question if we are a part of the problem. Right. And so I am encouraging all of you who are tuning in, who are part of disability organizations, to not run away from this issue of police brutality as being an issue that's not yours, because somewhere in the neighborhood of like a third to a half of all the people who die at the hands of police are folks with some kind of disabilities or mental health issues. Right. And then the other question I really want us to ask is, the issue around policing and the criminal justice system is a small portion of the institutionalized racism that we have in this country. So we should also be asking ourselves about what are we doing around our hiring practices? Some of the organizations that I respect the most, their staff are full of predominantly white women, right? Where is the diversity there, right? Where is the cry, and where, really looking at whether your policies and practices are in line with your stated values, because what the Black community, and I would even say the disability community, and particularly the Black disabled community, want now is not the Instagram square with the Black background and light letters using the right hashtag. What we want are jobs and opportunities and board positions and the things that
substantive policy changes and substantive changes in structure. And
exactly, the things that historically have closed the gap in opportunity and wealth here in the U.S. So I can go on, but just like that, those are the things that jump out to me in response to that.
No, thank you, and thank you for sharing your own personal truth. That's very powerful, and I think very impactful. So thank you so much for that. And I know, Anil, I know that you recently wrote a blog post for the National Federation of the Blind that is entitled "Being Black Helped Me Be Blind, and Being Blind Helped Me Understand That Black Lives Matter." And I know we're dropping a link to that into the chat. So I really encourage everyone to read that, because it touches on a lot of things that both Anil and Laderick have spoken about during the course of our conversation. Beth, is there anything, just as you think about this sort of COVID intersectionality, the disability community, like here we are and we're navigating, I think you already touched on some of this. Anything else that you want to sort of make sure gets on the table here?
I think that what we need to be really focused on, at the ADA 30th anniversary, and at this point in time when we are finally really taking systemic racism into a much more we're much more conscious of addressing this, that we need to look at solutions. And that's where intersectionality really comes in, is that in, for people with disabilities and to fix systemic racism, you have to look at solutions, not just advocate for change, but to actually make things happen. And that's what is somewhat frustrating, is that over the years, what has happened is that we talk about things, but we don't actually make changes. And so that's, to me, what I'm hoping is going to really happen, come out of this discussion.
And we're going to get to solutions in just a moment, or we're going to get into visioning, I'll say, so what those solutions might be. We have some questions from the audience about, what can I do to help create a more inclusive world? What things are overlooked? So we're gonna talk about that in a moment. But I did want to let our audience know, LaDerek, I know that your response to a lot of what happens is through your art and through your poetry. And LaDerek has written a poem that he'll be sharing and performing at the end of this program. So I encourage everyone to stick around, don't go anywhere. That really speaks to so much of what we've already touched on in this conversation. And am I correct, LaDerek? This is the world premiere. No one has heard this poem. There's no audience yet.
I've been working on it for a few weeks and finished it last night. So be kind, everybody.
No, absolutely. I think we are in for. If you know LaDerek's work, I and I'm sure many people viewing do. I think we're in for a really amazing treat. So we'll get to that in a moment. But I do want to shift us for a moment to just look ahead to the future. And and I think several of you touched on this idea that this idea of return to normal or back to normal or the new normal, I'm doing lots of air quotes, is that I've heard a lot of people across communities say, could we not do that, because normal actually doesn't work for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So we're really facing this remarkable time. And we have this opportunity to design design a new world, a new post-pandemic world. We're being asked to reimagine what transportation looks like, what education looks like, employment, cultural arts experiences, everything. And as we do that, I'm going to ask the three of you to sort of talk about what are your hopes and visions for that world, and then sort of the dovetail question onto that, or the parallel question, is again, what can we do? Like how can everyone who's watching today and will watch this program in the future, how do we all step in and become catalysts and agents for that forward momentum? So Anil, can I actually start with you?
Sure. And well, I'll start with the answer to the first part of your question first, because the blog post you referenced really was written for me as I was processing all of the stuff that I was dealing with and kind of the life epiphanies that I had. And what is explained in that blog post is really my own personal lived experience and my own perspective. So I think that the first answer is we've got to encourage everyone to go on that journey for themselves. I think too many people now are trying to make everybody see the world as they see it and define the world based on what's comfortable for them. But until you really do some self-exploration, and then beyond that, do some real education, because so much of what I thought was true, I've had to unlearn, and it's been required for me to do that. So the systems that were put in place to educate me, even in the context of Black history, were flawed because they were written from a perspective that wasn't authentic and didn't really give me the real, I'll say, straight skinny. So I've been really having some significant epiphanies around my perceptions around what was real and what was not real. So I encourage everyone to at least embark on that journey. And that way, when we do it, we're not being critical of others. We're really just trying to be self-critical, and we grow on ourselves. And then the first part of your question, that's how we're able to take a crisis like COVID and come out of it better than we came into it. Because if we sit back and only really focus on the pain and the, inconvenience is such a small understatement, just the disruption of life, you don't really take time to look at, okay, so what are we doing better here in this instance that we weren't doing before? So that when we come out of it, whether you want to call it that new normal, I think of it as evolution. And that's what we want to do. We want to use this opportunity to evolve into a better life, existence for everybody. And I think that there are some lessons that we've been able to learn that's going to allow us, meaning the National Federation of the Blind, and I hope that other organizations of people with disabilities and the world in general will be able to take coming out of this and really infuse that into everyone's lives in a way that makes it better for everyone. And I may be being idealistic, I may be being, too much of an optimist, but I think that without that perspective, then we won't be able to really be intent on really gleaming those particular pieces in order to come out of it better than we came into it.
Absolutely. Beth, do you want to dovetail onto that?
Sure. I think that one of my hopes with kind of confronting the new normal is to really include the voices of people with disabilities. It's essential to really have conversations with the people that you want to serve, and to think about, nothing about us without us, which is a saying in the disability community, but also, most movements. And that means that if we are listening to people with disabilities and we're thinking about systemic racism and other issues that we're confronting in our society, that we would be looking more at inclusive design, that we would be moving beyond accessibility, which are the foundational elements that we need to address, but we need to really think about inclusion more so than just accessibility. Accessibility is important.
Beth, can you just talk really quickly about that concept of inclusive design? Because I want to make sure that folks understand what we mean when we talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. And what I'm talking about is really thinking about how you design a facility or a program, like an exhibition or a public program or your website, so that you're meeting the needs of the broadest range of people, people at the either end of the spectrum of age and ability. And so if we start really taking the different characteristics of people and putting it into our equation about how we're designing, then we're going to really be inclusive. And so that's what we have the opportunity to do at this point in time as we think about what is the new normal.
Yeah, there's so many head nods happening right now. I see that Derek's nodding his head and Neil's nodding his head.
I think one of the key points that we should point out is so many times we're talking about doing this in a way that makes things accessible to people with disabilities, and we miss the business case that by making even art exhibits, we've been working with one of our partners, 3D PhotoWorks, to make tactile kind of multiple 4D experiences in the museum environment. But at our museum exhibit, it wasn't just accessible to blind individuals. They noted that the patrons of all the patrons, they had more dwell time on the multimodal exhibits than any of the other exhibits, because it created an experience that was new to them and was more robust.
Yeah, and we see it in education all the time, the idea of inclusion and teachers having space to collaborate, and that it is like the water that lifts all ships, right? And getting students who don't have diagnosed disabilities that perform better. The teachers have a better experience in education when they don't feel like they're just in it alone, but they're collaborating. And I think that diversity has always been key. It's always been key. And the more voices, the more perspectives, the more people you can design a system or policies to fit, the better off it's going to be for everyone. And I think that's also, Neil makes that great point about the tremendous economic benefits. This is one of the things that we're dealing with, is this onslaught of a recession. And so as businesses think about what is going to give them a competitive edge? Well, part of that is a diverse workforce. And I would also just say that it is important, even if you're a small business or small organization or small community, to realize that this is the work, right? Like, even if you're making widgets, part of the way in which you do that better is to spend the time up front having as diverse a team and an environment that can support as many people as possible. There's since this has all been going on, I've been using this Abraham Lincoln quote, which is like a variation, it's something like, if I have 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe, And so this is the sharpening of the axe. This is how you make yourself better. And this is how we make all of ourselves better. And then just the last one I'm going to throw in there is, one of the ways in which we make sure we change things is that we get out there and we vote. And like, particularly in this year with this election, and I'm very conscious that the election process is going to be very challenging given social distancing and what have you. But the vote has always, it is in our laws and our participation in the democratic process where so much of this change is allowed to happen. So don't ever be confused about that. It's important that, and it's not only about national, but on the local level as well, that we continue to make sure that our voices are heard.
It really provides an opportunity for us to be even more proactive. I think a lot of people don't take into consideration how powerful those local municipalities are with respect to designing the infrastructure that's going to either allow us to fully participate or create more barriers for our participation.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I know we're dropping lots of resources into the chat for folks to take a look at and to help them on their journeys. What I'm hearing from all of you is this idea of inclusive design across the board, and not just our buildings, but our cities, our educational structures, our employment structures, and that inclusivity means to just make the assumption that not everyone engages in an experience in the same way. I know this is really important to us at the Folklife Festival. It's one of the reasons that we wanted to have this conversation today, because we, being inclusive of all communities is very important to us, and really thinking about how do we create a experience when we are in the National Mall or in our digital landscape of what that looks like, and how we make sure that we're making sure there's a space at the table for everyone. So
Smithsonian is an exemplar in that space. I think that you guys, we refer to you on many bases when we're looking at other environments to make inclusive that you said.
Yeah. Well, that's all Beth. That's Beth's work right there. So she is the leader for all of us. Well, she's the leader for all of us, but she is, that you and your team are such a beacon for the work we do across the institution, for sure. And I know other folks look to us as well. I cannot believe that we are already at 45, 50 minutes here. This is such a wonderful discussion, and I don't want anyone to go anywhere, because you are in for a really incredible treat, because Laderick has written this piece that he's going to share with us. I know we have some questions out there. If we have any other final questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But this is such an important conversation, and I'm so grateful to all three of you and the perspectives that you bring to this. And I want to say to our viewers, it's very possible that you're leaving this conversation with more questions than you had 50 minutes ago when you signed on, and that's really okay. And so what we want to do is encourage all of you to continue to explore these issues that were discussed today. Go back to your own communities and have these conversations, and continue to have these conversations, and seek out, as Beth says, members of the disability community to really make sure that those conversations are happening and inclusive. In a minute, we're going to turn the floor over to Laderick for his. Before we do that, I just want to ask from the three of you: are there any final thoughts that you want to make sure that we have on the record, as it were?
I just appreciate the opportunity for the dialogue, and I'm glad that this is not kind of a culminating event, that you're actually in a way that can continue the conversation moving forward. And I think that's what's important. We've got to get to a place where we develop a degree of tolerance, at least to the degree that we give people an opportunity to develop the language, really, so that we can understand what they mean rather than try to get them to agree with us as we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to, before we shift to this, I do want to make sure that we take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to Anil Lewis, Beth Seabarth, Laderick Horn, for coming and giving so much for us to think about and for us to dream forward, and also sharing your own personal and professional perspectives on this work and what the ADA at 3 means. I'm so appreciative for all 3 of you. I also want to do just a quick couple thank yous before we move into the performance element of our program today. I do want to extend our thanks to Keena Lundy, as well as Vanderbilt University's Transition Tennessee program. And of course, as always, it takes a whole village to make these 45-minute programs, folks. And so I extend sincere thanks to my Smithsonian Folklife Festival colleagues, particularly Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Ginny Maycock, Albert Tong, Alex Taggart, Jason Morris, Zaki Gould, Josue Castilleja, and Sabrina Lynn Motley for their production, promotion, and administration efforts. Thank you to our viewers for participating today. We invite you to continue to follow our page on Facebook, get notifications about future events. We're on YouTube and Instagram as well. Don't forget to check out our website, and we have a great program coming up on August 13th, Encuentro en el Smithsonian, with music artists Susana Baca and Nydia Góngora, and that program will be in Spanish with English subtitles provided. So as we close out, we're going to turn the floor over to you, Laderick. Is there anything you want to say about this poem before you perform?
No, I mean, this is something that I wrote to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and just to try to make sense of the time we're in now.
Well, we're honored that you're going to share it with us. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
This is for the ones who would not be trapped behind exclusion's shameful wall. And this is for the ones who will continue to push until every barrier falls. This is for every wounded warrior who came home and challenged our grateful nation to elevate its expectations. This is for the ones who blocked the buses, sat in the sit-ins, and crawled to the Capitol. This is for the protesters, the marchers, those adapt angels with wheelchair wings who troubled the waters of their time so that this generation might live in a more inclusive now. As I write this, all over America, monuments are falling, and only questions stand atop each empty pedestal. As I recite this, I hope an artist is listening and will respond with marble and bronze. But until then, Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, this poem is for you. Let each line chase the light in your smile and trace the contours of your commitment. Let these words salute those dedicated to the ideals that equality sprouts from the branch of equity. Independence is the flower which grows from access, and freedom is rooted in the soil of advocacy. This is for the ones who have embraced the reality that humanity is both fragile and mighty. And when we ask for help, it is not a sign of weakness, but instead an indication of our determination. However you navigate, it is legit. This is for those who read with their eyes, ears, and fingertips. This is for the minds that dance in details, and for the wide-eyed ones who remake the world with every thought they think. We are the river of innovation from which the whole world drinks. And who am I? I am a lover of words, left heartbroken by every spelling test. In school, My desk was in a classroom at the end of the hall, and this poem is for me too. Within me is the meeting of two movements. I am Black and blue. My disability is hidden, and I am the descendant of those who could not hide. I am your neighbor, your countryman, one of the poets our nation has produced, and here is what I know to be true. This world is not enough. And if this here is what we call normal, I say, let's be different. Let us, on this day, celebrate every shape, every color, every way. Let our actions commemorate the array of our being. Build a future in service of the multitude, and let this century be the wilderness from which our better selves are born. Thank you.
Thank you, Lederick. Thank you on behalf of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, our other participants, and our audience today for sharing that beautiful, beautiful work with us. Thank you again to all of our guests, and thank you to our viewing audience. We'll see you again soon.